In this video, I will break down some of the problems that I see currently at Manchester United. United are currently in 7th place in the Premier League, but we all know that this club should be competing for titles. So, what is going wrong at Manchester United? Before we get into the video, please like and subscribe and follow me on my socials. Thanks. The first problem I have is with the main man in charge, Erik ten Hag. Now, he may have been a really great manager at Ajax, but I don't really care. That's not how the sport works. It doesn't matter how good he was or how good he can be, it matters how good he is now. He has been at Manchester United for a season and a half now, and I really have not seen too many improvements. Manchester United is a club that needs to be challenging for titles every season, and I don't see that happening with Ten Hag. Even if Manchester United give him a couple more years to try to work his magic, I don't see the club getting anywhere past mediocrity. The reason I say all of this is because Ten Hag has shown me nothing in terms of playstyle or potential to develop a team within a certain playstyle. I've watched every Man United game for the past 2 seasons and I can't really remember ever being impressed. The players that he puts on the field don't make any sense in terms of how he wants to play. He has some players that would be better in a possession based system, and then there are players that would work better in a transition and more counter-attacking team. And so what ends up happening is just the ball gets lumped in behind after a couple of passes, and the team is hoping that Rashford or Garnacho get to the ball and run as fast as they can to goal. There is poor and inconsistent build-up play, and they never look secure with the ball in any part of the field. Ten Hag has been relying on moments from his team, and these moments keep buying him extra time as manager. Scott McTominay is only on the field because he scores goals and keeps saving the team. Ten Hag is relying on a midfielder to make late runs and tap the ball in. This is an issue because you should not be relying on one player to save you week in, week out, but also because McTominay is not a real midfielder. He cannot do anything on the ball, he can't keep possession, he can't progress the ball, and he is a low IQ midfielder. This just leads to the midfield pretty much being non existent. Each game is just another game where Man United are trying to survive. They play so poorly almost every week that it is impossible to develop any sort of consistency, and that is pretty much due to Ten Hag's lack of tactical development with this team. The next problem is the signings. Since Sir Alex Ferguson left, most of the signings have been terrible, but I'm going to focus on the signings under Ten Hag so far. Which ones have been good? Which ones have been bad? Let's start with the good ones. I'd say the only good signings so far have been Lisandro Martinez and Rasmus Højlund. I genuinely think Lisandro Martinez is a great player and he can be a very important player for Manchester United moving forward. Højlund has obviously not had an unbelievable start at Manchester United, but people forget that this guy is 20 years old. Man United should have bought a proper established striker and potentially have Højlund as a backup and long-term striker and allow him to develop into his potential. Now, on to the bad signings. The loan deals for Weghorst, Sabitzer, Reguilon, and Amrabat are just a bit meh and came out of desperation, and none of these have had any major impact at the club, but Ten Hag bringing in Wout Weghorst on loan is a sackable offense. That guy was not a real footballer. Casemiro, Eriksen, and Johnny Evans all fit under the pointless signings category for me. None of these players have been bad, but these signings don't make much sense. It was quite obvious that Casemiro and Eriksen were just temporary signings and ones that might have some sort of good impact, but ultimately will be moved on from the club pretty quickly. It will be interesting to see how Casemiro plays after he comes back from injury, but I'm going to guess he will not be a necessary player for Man United next season. Next, we have three signings that are meant to be long-term signings that I think are terrible. First, we have Andre Onana. This guy just doesn't seem like a great goalkeeper. The amount of games that he has cost Man U this season is absolutely tragic. I've seen many argue that Onana will come good, but when you're a goalkeeper, you either have it or you don't. I just don't think Onana is good enough at the fundamentals of goalkeeping to end up being a top keeper at the club. Sure, he makes some good saves, but his shot stopping has been awful overall. Ten Hag brought him in because he is good with the ball at his feet, which doesn't matter at all because he just launches the ball upfield to nobody every time he touches it. There were definitely many goalkeeper options out there, and I don't think Onana was the right one. I might be wrong, maybe it's just a confidence issue, but I just don't see it. Next, we have Mason Mount. I don't think Mount is a bad signing because he is a bad player. I think he is a bad signing because he is not a great fit. I really don't understand why Ten Hag wanted Mason Mount out of all midfielders in the world. Every time I see a top midfielder play or transfer clubs, I just sit there and think, why did Ten Hag want Mount instead of this guy? For example, Mateus Nunes went to Man City for around the same amount of money as Mount to United, and I was like, how on earth are the biggest club on the planet not snatching this guy up? He would be perfect in that midfield. Last, and definitely not least, we have Antony. This is the best example of why I question Ten Hag's signings and Ten Hag as a manager. No one could ever explain or justify this signing to me. Even if it was a free transfer, this guy should never be touching the field at this level. He is one of the worst footballers in the Premier League and one of the worst signings of all time. There's no potential for him to succeed at Man United because he just simply doesn't have the footballing ability or brains to be a top player. He does the same thing every time he touches the ball and is incredibly ineffective. At this point, the only reason he starts games is because Ten Hag probably feels forced to start him. Also, it just pains me to read that Man United spent almost 100 million euros on a guy who has never used his right foot. The next issue is the players. I already talked about a few of the players, but let's talk about some more. A lot of the blame goes on the manager, but there has to be blame placed on the guys on the field. First, we can start with Marcus Rashford. When Man United fans started calling this guy the best player in the world, I thought I was losing my mind. Last season, Rashford scored a lot of goals but did very little over 90 minutes. These types of players get found out very quickly. When they don't score, you see how much of an issue they are to the team. Rashford is a very average footballer with very little consistency. He is also a very limited one dimensional player, which is not always a bad thing, but the consistency part is. Man United has relied on him to be the goal scorer, but this season he has barely scored any goals, and more importantly, he has barely put in any great performances, and it doesn't look like he's going to improve. Also, he has one of the worst attitudes I've seen in recent years, and his work ethic is so poor. Speaking of poor attitude, next we have Bruno Fernandes. This guy is not captain material at all. His attitude is awful, and he is always acting like a little child, always complaining and throwing himself to the ground for absolutely no reason. He is also supposed to be a creative demon, but I don't really see it. I don't care what the stats say, he is so wasteful and does sometimes put in a good performance, but these are inconsistent. Last player I want to talk about is Rasmus Højlund. I already talked about him a bit. He is a player for the future, but his current play can still be criticized. I do like his profile a lot, but he hasn't been great. He doesn't get an insane amount of service, but he has still missed some easy chances. He does seem to have a bit of poor movement sometimes, and he is always late to the ball. He is either in the wrong spot or he just doesn't make his runs on time. Also, a content creator pointed this out, shout out to Lias, and it stood out to me so much when he mentioned it. He said that he is always in a 1v1 duel and he is always getting too physical with the defenders. Once I read this, every time I watched Højlund, that is what I would see. It would be him and a defender trying to tackle each other to the ground, basically. So maybe he should focus more on making runs or receiving the ball rather than trying to battle the defenders constantly. The next problem is the club mentality and standards. When I started watching football back in 2010, every time I watched Man United, I thought they were going to win just because they were Man United. Now, every time anyone watches Man United, they expect them to lose. The club has gone so downhill since 2013, and it's just quite sad for the entire footballing world to watch the downfall of such a historic and dominant club. This downfall also allows for standards for what is good to drop, both for the club and the fans. In the last 10 years, the club has just basically been supporting small victories. It's still funny to hear Man United fans talk about how they finished second in the Premier League under Mourinho and Ole and act like it's an accomplishment. In both those seasons, they finished significantly behind Manchester City. Finishing 19 points behind Man City is not an achievement if you finish second place. That's just sad. Even this season, Man United fans are celebrating beating teams like Chelsea and Aston Villa and then go and lose the next week, but then continue talking about how they beat those clubs. They try to sell themselves some sort of dream where they think that they are making a comeback and then they get sent back to reality next week. Also, a lot of this mentality can be seen in the players as well. Half the time, they look like they don't care. Their body language sucks, their attitudes suck, and most importantly, their work rate is awful. There's barely any fight left in these players, and there really isn't an excuse not to try your hardest. The last issue at Manchester United is the injuries and off the field controversies. There's no denying that Manchester United have struggled with injuries this season. It'll be interesting to see how they play when all of their players are fit again. My guess is that the team will still perform poorly, but who knows? Maybe these injured players will have a big impact. Also, there is obviously the Jadon Sancho situation, where basically Sancho was not selected for a match because of his poor work ethic and training, and then he basically went on social media and called Ten Hag a liar. Honestly, I don't mind Ten Hag's actions in this situation, but all of this drama is not necessary for the club. Either Sancho should apologize or try to leave the club and try to regain some form at a different club. Also, it will be interesting to see what happens with Mason Greenwood. He has had those serious allegations against him dropped, and now he is playing out on loan in Getafe. I think Man United want to bring him back, and I think he is a player that would be very helpful to this current team. I don't really care what happens with him, but it's just another negative thing surrounding the club that eventually has to be dealt with. So, those are 5 problems with Manchester United currently. Please tell me if you agree or disagree in the comments. Again, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.